like we're good to go. Thank you so much for coming, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Caitlin Cornell, Assistant Director of the Center for Language Teaching Advancement at Michigan State University. I'm happy to welcome you to the opening session of our Spring 2022 series. I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction, as Jana said, and we'll allow some people to kind of float in, and then we'll get started in just a few minutes. The Language Collaboratory is a partnership for the advancement of intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, represented today by Adolfo, among others, perhaps. I can't see everyone in the thumbnails right now. Michigan State University and the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Jana is joining us, among others, from there today. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional learning opportunities for educators of language, culture, and literature at the 5 institutions. Our series this semester continues our goal for this whole year, furthering conversations on the topic of student engagement. We have addressed this issue from 2 perspectives, research and also pedagogical and practical. We aim to share insights and to encourage interinstitutional dialogue, bridging institutional distance, and fostering a collaborative interchange of ideas. You're invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion, as always. The sessions will be recorded and made available through each institution's website. We ask that you mute your microphone at the outset and that you use the tools in Zoom to contribute questions and comments in the chat. We will also have a Jamboard for this session, but we'll talk more about that as we get to it. During the open discussion period, which is really everything in today's session, please raise your hand virtually prior to activating your microphone. Closed captioning is available through the live transcript button in the Zoom menu bar. Today, my co-facilitators, Adolfo and Jana, and I are pleased to lead an unwebinar discussion about flexibility. There are 3 distinct phases of pandemic teaching that we can identify: pivoting, emergency, and remote. However, this semester has shaped up to be an undeniable 4th phase, a phase that mixes elements of all 3. Nonetheless, one challenge has remained throughout. How can we faculty balance providing compassion with how students complete work in class? It's clear that expectations and allowances have changed. This session will follow a super flexible format, an unwebinar style, I'm using air quotes. The webinar agenda and content will be determined by the people here today. We hope you brought your questions around managing flexibility in your course with compassionate, rigorous teaching. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to encourage everyone to attend our next session, which will be held on Monday, February 28th at this same time. On that date, we will swap ideas about what digital content appears most engaging to students. After today's session, you'll receive an email inviting you to provide feedback about the session today. Please consider giving us your input. We really appreciate your comments. With no further ado, I think we're ready to begin. Jana is going to stick the Jamboard for this session into the chat. And I think we're ready to go.
And while Jana is doing that, thank you everyone for joining us. This is Adolfo speaking. We wanted to start also by getting a sense of what your experience is that you're bringing. As Caitlin mentioned, we have identified 3 clear phases of the pandemic and perhaps a 4th one, but we wanted to get a feel for who is in the room and what experiences you might have gone through. And so I'm gonna launch a poll just basically asking you to provide input as to which of these phases resonate with you, which of these phases have been part of your experience, and also just to get a feel for how things are going this semester before we open the floor for our conversation today. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to provide your responses to this brief poll, and then I'll share the results before jumping into the Jamboard and go over some conversation points that we want to propose and suggest for you. So I'll just give it another minute. And this is really fun to see how the results are shaping up and how people are responding. And I'm gonna end the poll in just a second, and then I will share the results with you. So I'm ending the poll, and we actually have a pretty good representation of the different phases. It seems like you have experience with the different phases of the pandemic and associated pandemic teaching, and things are unsure yet as to how spring 22 is shaping up to be, but for the most part on the positive side of good sailing, which is very, very good to hear. We'll move on now to the Jamboard and what we have prepared to get us started. We thought it would be beneficial to get everyone on the same page in regards to what we mean by flexibility, because it can mean different things for different people. And what we have here is a space for you to chime in with any attributes that you associate with these terms. So if you can take a minute just to reflect on what flexibility means to you, just provide one or two words that you associate with it. If you see that something has already been typed, what you can do is drag one of the stars and put it with that word that has already been provided. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes just to chime in, give us a sense of what flexibility means to you before jumping right into the conversation. So again, you can type your ideas, and if you see something that you like and resonates with you, you can drag one of the stars and just move it to that circle or a square or rectangle. I don't know my words this afternoon. I apologize for that. It's not a circle, it's a rectangle. And it seems like we're running out of stars. If you just hover over one and you right click, one of the options is duplicate. So you could also try that, just duplicating one of the stars. I didn't anticipate so many ideas resonating with everyone, but that's another option, and you can replicate one of the stars. Duplicate, not replicate, duplicate. I think I'm losing my linguistic skills this afternoon, so again, apologies for that. Duplicate any of the stars. So what we'll do now, we'll open the floor to share. Those of you who type the ideas that have resonated the most on our board right now, if you can just tell us a little more about your rationale behind what you wrote. So one of the ideas that seems to be popular, according to what we see on the screen, is being available. If anyone would like to comment on that, what does that mean, being available?
I put that down because I was thinking more from the perspective of the student. Students would like their teachers to care about them, and availability, being available and being there for them is I think important, so that they have that understanding. that's what it means for me. It doesn't mean that I need to be available 24/7, but if they need help, I would like to be there for them so that we have that understanding.
Thank you, Jana, for sharing. What about the listening and acting? Who can comment on that?
That was me, Mrs. Kate. Sorry, I'm eating my lunch. This is why my camera was off. I put that down because I think there's a big difference between just listening to your students and giving them an opportunity to say like what's working and what isn't working, but then doing something based upon what they say. So, being willing to adjust. I was also the one who wrote Rethinking Assessment, being willing to adjust your assessment practices in the middle of the term because it's not working for your students, and thinking about a way to adjust that in a way that's fair, that is going to alleviate some of their burden. I mean, that's just one example, but getting feedback from them, but then doing something about it once you get the feedback.
Thank you, Kate. And we'll get back to your point about compassion in the next slides. I'm hoping we will have more ideas about that. What about extra effort?
I starred that. I wasn't the one who added that, but I think that's like the most challenging thing to me about flexibility is like, yes, I want to be there for my students. I want to be compassionate. I want to listen and respond, but it is also like just a lot of effort, both just and things to do and also just emotionally. It's like a lot of emotional labor sometimes too. So I feel that a lot.
Excellent. Thank you, Lauren, for sharing. And the last one I'm going to call on is it's a necessity. That reads very powerful to me. Who would like to comment on that?
That was me, and also extra effort, because you have to, no matter the extra effort, no matter the mess. That was me as well. No matter how compassionate you want to be, for me, it's been draining. Keeping track of the late homework, of not being prepared for class because of this and that, but it's a necessity. Like, I'm not going to change that. Okay. I just need to adapt to that. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana. And that's our great jumping off point for our next slide. Caitlin, if you want to move us forward. So whether you're here for the ride or not, there's something that you have had to do to account for all of these challenging circumstances this semester. And so what I thought might be useful is to identify some of the things that have worked for you and your students again, with this framework of flexibility, which we already heard different versions about, not different versions, different components of it. What are some of the things that have gone really well for you? Again, understanding there's been emotional drainage, there's been extra effort in all of those, but there are some things that when applied, they have worked. So why don't you tell us about those good things that have allowed you and your students to have a little more flexibility? So again, we'll take a minute or two, chime in with your ideas, and then we'll just try to capture main points in a minute. And just remember, if we run out of stars, you can just duplicate them if you need to. But why don't we go ahead? It seems like we have some clear winners in a way that we can briefly talk about. So more flexible attendance policy. Who would like to comment on that? Anyone can chime in, even if you didn't write it. If it resonated with you, would love to hear what you did.
I think that one is sort of like a yes and no for me, because it's definitely working for students. I think that there's no way that we could not have flexible attendance right now. But it's also been very challenging to manage as the instructor and just as like a human. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. I started because I agree with it and I'm doing it and I think it's important, but also has its challenges.
Yeah, and we'll get to the challenges in just a bit, but yes, more questions than answers, especially when students are asked to be isolated or quarantined. What do you do? There's not really a choice there, is there? What about individual check-in meetings with the students? Kind of the personalized element of instruction. Anyone who would like to chime in about that? How did you do it?
Well, I can mention what I do. So I started doing this a long time ago with my students. Just in particular, I have a lot of first year students, and I find that they can be a little bit scared of office hours, and sort of having the individual check-in helps them kind of demystify what it means to talk with your professor. But so right now I'm doing them either over Zoom or in person, depending on the situation. And I usually try to meet with all students for 15 minutes by the 4th week of classes, just to check in, see how they're doing. And I think it opens the door for them to get in touch with you if they have questions. And, you know, it's just that personalized meeting with them to find out, you know, what their background is and why they're taking, in my case, German, and what they hope to get out of the course, whether or not they're finding everything on our Canvas site, if there's anything I can help them with to make them be more successful in the course.
Thank you, Jean, for sharing. That sounds great. There are some great ideas on this slide. If there are things that you haven't thought about integrating, perhaps here are some ideas that you might want to consider. Why don't we move on to the next, which is about things that you thought were going to bring flexibility, but kind of ended up not doing that. Did you have any of those experiences? Just chime in with your ideas. What sort of things you were trying to do as elements of flexibility and didn't quite go that like you were planning. So again, we'll take another minute or two and then talk about main points. Okay, and this one seemed to be a little more challenging, or maybe with not much, not really working, but we have three ideas presented. I can attest to the hybrid option. I think HyFlex and hybrid were thought to be the answers to it all, and in the end, it wasn't quite advantageous to some students, since their private space wasn't quite adequate for doing some of the remote attendance on a regular basis. So I have heard from the libraries, for example, that it's been chaotic at times when there are 20 students trying to join their classes, and it just hasn't quite worked as people thought. And two other ideas that we have, no, one is I cannot think of anything, which I think applies to a lot in our group. And then about students really not taking agency in and taking advantage of the different options presented to them. Excellent. We'll move on to our next, which is more about really getting to the point of finding this balance between being flexible, but also being firm. So just getting more to the really granular level of our conversation today, just pinpointing what actually got to precisely that, balancing being firm while at the same time providing compassion to your students. So tell us one or two things that got precisely to that point. And just looking at the time, again, we have two clear preferred themes. So if anyone can chime in with the first one, discussing expectations for flexibility, making sure that the students are responsible for understanding deadlines. Who can chime in with that?
I mean, I added that, so I can chime in. But I mean, this is something that I've been doing for a while now, especially with disability accommodations, is having an explicit discussion with students about like how those accommodations will be implemented in our class, and like what are some specific assignments that I can't be flexible on and why that is. And just making sure that we both know what our respective responsibilities are, to sort of like head up any potential complications, I guess, off at the pass.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Lauren, that documenting that communication, it's also crucial. Excellent, thank you. And the other one, being flexible with due dates, with a caveat that communication is very related. Kate, seems like you want to jump in.
That was mine. So yeah, it is related. I mean, I see the tie to being explicit. It's about handling things on a case-by-case basis for students because things happen, but I'm always reminding them that if you're going to be absent, tell me in advance, or if you need an extension, tell me in advance and we can talk about it. I feel like the after the fact thing, like it's just a little bit more difficult to provide that accommodation when the student hasn't built that trusting relationship with you.
Yeah, and I like that also because the point here is that you ultimately want them to complete the work, right? And if they start lagging behind, it comes to the point that there's no catching up as much as you would like to. So extensions was also mentioned. Anyone who would like to chime in with extensions? Okay, we don't have any takers. Just to help us debrief, there have been a lot of great ideas. I'm really pleased and thankful for all of the points you have brought forward. And I just wanted to take a minute and provide an opportunity for main takeaways from the ideas that have been shared this afternoon. So Caitlin, if you move to the next, just what is one main idea that you think you would like to explore further, to continue, or perhaps take the idea, modify it, make it your own? If anyone would like to chime in, something maybe that you didn't try, but you heard this afternoon from others that might be something worthwhile thinking a little more about. Anyone can chime in.
I can jump in. I like Jean's idea of the individual check-ins. I did that when I was teaching remotely because I felt so disconnected from my students, but I haven't done it I haven't done it teaching face-to-face. And so I like the idea of trying to incorporate that a little bit more intentionally. So I appreciate you sharing all those details, Jean.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, I'm a very social person. I really like to know my students, and it's a good opportunity just to ask them questions and, you know, joke about things. And, you know, I find that the relationship in class relaxes a lot more once you know someone a little bit outside of class.
Yeah, and we have a comment in the chat from Lauren about the time commitment that this entails. And it reminds me of a technique that I heard from the writing studies program at our university, in which they actually have been doing the check-ins even prior to the pandemic, and they only dedicate 3 minutes to each student. But what that brings is really a pressure to focus on what it is really that you want to converse about. So it doesn't need to be extensive, like 15 minutes or half an hour with each student, but something that can really help you focus on what might be in their minds or important to your students at that point. So 3 minutes might be an option and a more doable logistically. Anybody else?
And Adolfo, I just would like to I see it's 4:02. So to respect everybody's time, I am going to pause the recording. Thank you so much for coming. And for those of you who would like to stay and chat a little bit more, we will. But just for like the official session, I am going to turn us off.